When working in the modifier stack, you'll sometimes find yourself in situations where simply adding a modifier directly on top of whatever else is already in the stack won't do the job. No, at times you'll be needing to position your modifier somewhere in the middle of the stack. Now sometimes that's needed, at other times it's absolutely necessary. Let me show you what I mean. Let's activate the front view, then head to the command panel to create some text. Down in the area where you type, let's go ahead and enter 3ds Max. Now once you've done that, you can go ahead and click in the middle of your front view. Let's now center our work using the Shift-Control-Z shortcut. Now if that drops it down a little bit too low in the perspective view, we can reposition that by panning. Hold down the middle mouse wheel and slide the text upwards. Okay, back in the command panel, we'll enter the Modify column and grab an Extrude modifier. Let's now change the amount of the extrude to 25. Let's say that we're now wanting to customize the look of our text, maybe grabbing a few vertices and moving around in a few different places. Put a more formal way, we're wanting to work at the sub-object level on our original 2D shape. In order to be able to do that, getting down to the sub-object level and the lines that make up our letters, we're going to need to add an Edit Spline modifier into the mix. Let's go ahead and throw that on. We'll go on the modifier list looking for the Edit Spline. Now take a look at that. The Edit Spline modifier is no longer listed in the commands. Now it's not going to magically show up, so just close the list. Think about this. Once the extrude has been added to the text, Max no longer sees the object as two-dimensional, and in that won't give you a 2D modifier in the list when you go to grab it. As soon as you apply a 3D modifier, like extrude, at least at that point or position in the stack, Max no longer sees things as 2D, and in that won't give you any 2D commands. So we have to look at the stack and ask ourselves, at what point in time, in what position or location, does Max still see the entries in the list as 2D? Well, that would be down at the text level, right? So in order to have access to the Edit Spline modifier, a 2D command, we have to move down the stack before entering the modifier list. Drop down to the text entry in the stack and go back looking in on the modifiers. All of a sudden, look what shows up. We've got the Edit Spline, which we can now apply. Now as soon as you do that, take note of the way that things look on the screen. Being below the extrude modifier in the stack, Max returns to displaying this as 2D. Look at where the Edit Spline is positioned in the stack. Modifiers added to the stack are positioned directly above where you're currently at in the stack. Now we can go in and make a few changes. Let's take our front view full screen. We'll now open up the Edit Spline, getting to the vertex level. Now let's see if we can't have some fun. I'm going to select a couple vertices and move them around. I'll work on both the top of the 3 in the S and the bottom. Then on the M, I'll select a few vertices in the middle and move them up. Let's now return to the stack, jumping back up to the extrude level. After that, we'll take our viewports back to 4. I'll then activate the perspective view full screen and orbit around. Why don't we take a look at one other example of the need to work in the middle of the stack? I'm going to go ahead and reset my screen up at the application button on the left. When it asks me to save, I'm going to say no. Okay, let's activate the front view, creating an ellipse. I'm going to be drawing that from the upper left to the lower right corner. Now, you might notice that the ellipse isn't perfectly smooth as the lines go around. To improve that, we'll go to the Modify column. We'll open up the Interpolation tab, and under Steps, we can increase that number. Why don't we take that to about 25? Okay, now that we've done that, we'll go back in the modifier list, this time adding a bevel. For the level 1 height, we'll change that to 35. We'll then activate level 2 by checking the checkbox. Now once we've done that, we'll change the level 2 height to 5 and the outline to -8. Okay, let's say that we'd now like to nest a couple of other shapes inside the ellipse in order to carve out a few holes. Attaching the original ellipse to a couple other shapes would again require the use of an Edit Spline modifier. But we're running into the same problem as before. Once the bevel has been added into the stack, Max no longer sees what we have on the screen as 2D. The bevel made it 3D, right? In fact, let's go in the modifier list and look for the Edit Spline modifier. Again, it's nowhere to be found. So in order to get the Edit Spline into our stack, we've got to go to a level where Max is still interpreting things two-dimensionally. That's down at the ellipse. Now before we do that though, let's go ahead and draw the additional shapes that we want to attach to the ellipse. I'm going to use a few more ellipses. Let's activate the front view, going back to the Shapes command in the command panel. Here's our ellipse. Then maybe I'll draw another one off to the side here, and then I'll copy that using my Move Shift command over to the other side. Okay, now to get them into our extruded object. We'll select the surface in the viewport, then head back to the Modify column. Now here's where we have to make a switch as to where we are in the stack. In the list, click on Ellipse. Now we can go back in the Modifier list to add the edit spline. There it is, go ahead and add it in. Now at the edit spline level, we should now have the Attach command a little farther down. Click on the Attach button and now carefully click on all three other ellipses. When they turn white, it'll mean that they've been added to the original shape. After doing that, back in the stack, we can now go back and click on Bevel. And there you go. So very important stuff as to sometimes needing to work not at the top of the stack, but somewhere in the middle. If you ever go on the list to add a certain modifier and it's not there, there's probably a good reason. I'm going to go ahead and save this out as middle of the stack completed if you'd like to look it over.